I introduced you last month to the weird and wacky world of celebrity exorcists, celebrity Catholic exorcists. I have to make sure that I specify, because I think evangelical Christianity has exorcists and they can engage in like exorcism type activities, I guess, for lack of a better term. I'm specifically talking about Catholic exorcism here, and the weird world of celebrity exorcists, which is thriving, alive, and well here in the United States and elsewhere, I am sure. And unless you are in conservative Catholic circles or for some reason are kind of tuned into this stuff, you might not know anything about this. You might not know anything about these people. You probably are not aware of the kind of rhetoric that they are promoting in society, and the very real harm, unfortunately, that their teachings and perspectives are causing and having in people's lives. It's really, really unfortunate. And so I want to start getting into that all this year and going forward. The celebrity exorcist rabbit hole is one of my new rabbit holes for 2026 onward. And I decided that these series of articles that are being published right now were just a perfect way to bring everybody into it and get everybody on the same page, so to speak, before I really start to take you down the deep end. So last month we read part 1, which was Father Ripperger's bizarre and dangerous views on women, I think was the title of the article, something like that. And now this is part 2. It was published on January 6th. I was hoping I would catch it, and I did. This is published on wherepeteris.com, written by Mark Lewis. This is an analysis commentary piece, and I will be giving my opinion and commentary on what he has to say and on my perspective of Father Ripperger, Father Chad Ripperger, who is the subject of the article that we're going to be reading now. In part 1 of this series, Mike Lewis examined Father Chad Ripperger's public claims about women in general, that they are uniquely prone to emotional disorder, inclined toward control, and spiritually impeded by what he calls the curse of Eve. Those claims do not remain abstract. They are carried directly into his teaching on marriage, where they become prescriptions governing authority, sexuality, work, money, obedience, and even salvation. This second part focuses on Ripperger's public teachings and opinions, where his ideas cease to be theoretical and begin to impact people and families. I mean, I think I made a pretty good case in the first part that just his views on women alone stand to have a negative impact on people and families, but I digress. The Catholic Church's doctrine of marriage is demanding. It calls spouses to lifelong fidelity, self-gift, patience, sacrifice, and conversion, but it does not demand submission through humiliation, collapse consent into obligation, or baptize domination as holiness. When marriage is taught primarily as a hierarchy enforced by fear of sin, demonology, and shame, it stops functioning as a sacrament of communion and begins to operate as a disciplinary system. The stakes here are not abstract. Ordinary Catholics attempt to implement Ripperger's distorted and theologically unsound views in their lives, and real damage is done to marriage and families. The problem with Father Chad I'm just going to call him Father Chad. The problem with Father Chad's philosophy of marriage is not simply its emphasis on authority, but the persistent contempt with which wives are described, evaluated, and instructed. This is not a matter of tone or rhetorical excess. Language forms consciences. Repeated patterns of speech teach listeners what is normal, what is expected, and what kinds of suffering should be quietly endured. Across multiple talks, including those addressed explicitly to wives and mothers, women are not primarily treated as people with dignity, agency, and conscience who are united in communion with their spouses, but as risks to be managed, liabilities to be constrained, and sources of disorder unless properly governed. And it's really, really sad to say that strains and threads and elements of this very disordered viewpoint are alive and well in probably all denominations of conservative religion, but I have my own experience with conservative Catholicism specifically, having been raised a cradle Catholic. And it's really sad to say that I saw this kind of rhetoric, maybe not quite as blatant as it is here, but I was exposed to these kinds of things. I heard these kinds of things through the church communities and the environment that I was raised in. I was raised in a very conservative Catholic environment. And so a lot of this is not really news to me. In a talk titled Spiritual Warfare in Marriage, available on YouTube, and he has the video linked, Chad frames sexual relations within marriage almost entirely in terms of obligation and enforcement. If one of the spouses reasonably asks for the conjugal act, it must be rendered, he says. Otherwise, it's mortally sinful to deny that request. He continues, after the marriage, it's no longer a gift, it's an obligation. Your contract didn't say, I'll render the marital debt when I feel like it. In this framework, consent as an ongoing moral reality effectively disappears. What remains is entitlement backed by the threat of mortal sin. And there is a larger conversation to be had here about the concept of consent within conservative Catholicism as a whole, and how it really, at least when I was growing up, didn't really seem to exist as a concept and wasn't spoken about really at all. This logic becomes more disturbing when Chad addresses situations in which a wife refuses sex. In the same talk, he explicitly dismisses a headache as a legitimate reason to refuse the marital act. On the other hand, a headache doesn't suffice. Sorry, I got a headache. While he allows that extreme incapacity might justify a refusal, the baseline posture is one of suspicion. A woman's explanation is treated as morally meaningful in itself, but as something to be evaluated for compliance. This is not how the Catholic Church understands marital intimacy, which must always remain free, mutual, and expressive of love, rather than enforced under threat of sin. Now, I want to make sure and acknowledge the fact here that the Catholic Church's stance on marriage can be seen as rather controversial, depending on how you perceive it or how you view the Catholic Church in general. But if you are a Catholic and you want to live your life according to what the Catholic Church teaches, it's really important to emphasize that what Chad Ripperger is advocating for does not reflect church teaching in any way, shape, or form. And people may have issues with church teaching on marriage, and that's, a conversation for another time, definitely. But just within the construct of Catholicism, what Chad has to say is untrue and is not reflective of the church's teaching on marriage. Ripperger enforces this coercive framing by rejecting covenantal language in favor of a narrowly contractual account of marriage. Quote, marriage is defined as a solemn contract, not a covenant, he states, adding that it is a contract precisely because it involves a conferral of bodily rights. That's a stretch. He contrasts this with what he portrays as a post-Vatican II shift away from what he calls the obligation of justice. When marriage is framed primarily as a contract governing access to another person's body, a transactional approach emerges. Treating sexual availability as something owed rather than freely given creates conditions in which coercion can be rationalized as fidelity. Beyond condemning a spouse who refuses to render the marital debt, which is such a gross thing to say, Ripperger offers no guidance about how to respond when one spouse does not consent to sex. At around the 20-minute mark of his talk, he simply reiterates his beliefs about the obligatory nature of the marital contract, framing reluctance or refusal by one spouse as the product of demonic suggestion rather than as a morally significant situation requiring discernment, patience, and sacrifice. Here's the block quote here. Quote, the demons suggest to people various things which make them think they have sufficient reason to deny the marital debt. He's not being romantic, therefore you can deny the marital debt. Or they tend to think that rendering the marital debt after marriage is something that's voluntary. Well, in a certain sense it is, because you have to choose to actually fulfill your obligations, but it's not voluntary in the sense that after you're married, that somehow or another it's at your discretion when you pass when you pass out this good, so to speak. It's not voluntary in the sense that you're married that after you're married, that somehow or another, it's at your discretion when you pass out this good, so to speak. So that's an important fact. You'll hear the phrase gift of self. Now, that phrase can actually have a legitimate meaning. Gift means it's gratuitous, that you don't have to give it, which means it's only true on the day of your marriage. That's the day when the gift itself occurs. After that, it's a gift, it's an obligation. And the demons have subtly pushed this idea that, well, since it's a gift, I can just say whenever I want to and when I don't. What is striking here is not only what Ripperger says, but what he does not say. He does not state that a husband must respect his wife's refusal in all circumstances. He does not acknowledge consent as a continuing moral reality within marriage. He does not caution against coercion, manipulation, or the misuse of authority. The absence of such qualifications leaves open the possibility that obligation will be interpreted unilaterally, particularly by listeners already inclined toward control. And I can tell you, having done the research, that Chad is not talking to newcomers. He is speaking to a very specific audience within conservative Catholicism. And I would wager to guess that that sector that he is addressing are already primed to receive what he is saying as a statement of fact. In this framework, the risk is not merely theoretical. Emphasizing sexual obligation without explicit limits or safeguards can create conditions in which coercion is rationalized as duty and resistance is interpreted as sin. In the most serious cases, such reasoning can be invoked by abusers to excuse sexual abuse, including marital rape, not because these acts are endorsed, but because the moral language needed to name and resist them is never applied. When a priest's public teaching omits clear prohibitions against coercion while stressing obligations in absolute terms, it raises legitimate concerns about how that teaching may be received and applied in vulnerable situations. This omission is especially notable when Chad's approach is compared with other faith-based hierarchical or patriarchal models, which at least attempt to articulate boundaries or warnings against abuse. In Ripperger's account, marriage is presented through abstract categories: first principles, right reason, natural law. Oh my gosh, don't even get me started on natural law. That is a whole separate kind of little rabbit hole that is directly connected to this one and underpins so much of the rationale for how Chad views the world. All of this applied without sustained attention to power imbalances or the potential for grave harm. Obligation is defined without precision. Protection from potentially dangerous and abusive situations is not. At the best, this type of thing, treating sex within a marriage as something that you have to do, as this obligatory act that you must perform anytime the other person wants it, at best is going to torpedo your sex life, I would think, because that's just not, it's not the kind of thing. Intimacy does not thrive under like a pressure vacuum kind of thing, right? It needs space, it needs tender care, it needs acceptance in order to flourish and to become something that you can share with another person. Like, none of this is going to encourage that kind of thing in a marriage, which is just really, really sad. The disrespectful way Chad speaks about women, it is so incredibly disrespectful. You can tell that he really thinks that, like, women are like maybe one cut above demons. And the disrespectful way that he speaks about us becomes even more explicit in a separate talk addressed to wives and mothers, also posted publicly on YouTube. By the way, the vast majority of the problematic things that Chad and his goon squad have said, the vast majority of the problematic things that they have said are in audio visual format. Most of the written stuff has already been removed from the internet, actually, and so it's down to these videos, talks and things that he's given that have been recorded, or interviews that have been clipped and posted on TikTok or whatever. That's where you find his like actual perspective and the reality of how he views the world, and it's an interesting one. In this video, he advises men considering marriage, quote, "I always tell guys who are thinking about marrying, marry a virtuous woman. I don't care how ugly she is. I don't care if you have to put a lamb chop around her face to make her appealing. If she has virtue, you'll be happy the rest of your life." He offers this line without explanation, distancing, or pastoral framing. So, whatever the hell that is supposed to mean. This remark is striking not only for its cruelty, but for its bizarre and unexplained reliance on pop culture references. The lamb chop image echoes a joke popularized by comedian Rodney Dangerfield. "When I was a kid, I was so ugly, my parents would tie a pork chop around my neck so that the dog would play with me." And the closing phrase, "You'll be happy the rest of your life," evokes the lyrics of Jimmy Soul's chart-topping 1963 novelty hit, The Ugly Wife Song. Ripperger does not acknowledge these sources, nor does he explain why he is importing mid-century stand-up comedy and novelty music tropes into a clerical setting that carries moral authority. The effect is to normalize ridicule of women's bodies as harmless humor within spiritual instruction. Well, I mean, if the last time that Chad was paying attention to pop culture references was 1963, I think we know why things are so regressive and why there's so little development in the prefrontal cortex. I mean, the thing may just be like completely calcified at this point. In 1963, between 1963 and 2026, things have changed a lot, especially just in regard to how women are perceived in society, the freedoms that we're given, the rights that we have. All of that has changed a lot since 1963. So I think we may be narrowing in on a bit of a problem here. In the same talk, Ripperger frames motherhood itself as a kind of aesthetic loss. Women actually end up, usually, in the normal course of things, sacrificing a certain degree of their beauty because they're having children. He says, "The issue is not acknowledging that pregnancy and childbirth changes bodies, it's the evaluative frame. Beauty is something women sacrifice, something men lose, something to be endured rather than honored. Desire, attraction, and affection for one's spouse are treated as trivial or suspect, while women are subtly instructed to expect diminishment as part of their vocation." And where have we heard that kind of rhetoric before? I mean, it's everywhere. This rhetoric is part of a broader pattern in which women are held disproportionately responsible for the emotional and spiritual health of the household. In the same Wives and Mothers talk, Chad claims that the wife and the mother can either break or make the tenor of a household and insists that if the wife is not virtuous, nobody will be happy. The moral burden of harmony is placed squarely on the wife, while male withdrawal or disengagement is implicitly normalized as a response to female failure. This is such bad advice. This is so going to cause so many problems, has caused so many problems in people's marriages and lives. I mean, let's just take for a moment, consider, what we would think of as like a typical conservative Catholic household, especially in, modern day America, right? You're probably talking about single income household. You're probably talking about multiple children, 5+. You're probably talking about homeschooling is a very real possibility, or at the very least Catholic school or something like that, which is going to be expensive, going to cause a strain on the finances. I mean, simply clothing and feeding multiple children will put quite a strain on the finances. Having children is not cheap. If it's a single income household, that means the husband and father, who is already, as we're reading here, being encouraged to withdraw and disengage from the family, is going to be gone out of touch, which means that the majority of the responsibility for taking care of the house and meeting the daily needs of the children is going to be squarely on the mother. And there's been much written and said about the unpaid labor that women provide in the household and how unappreciated that is in general. Well, this kind of thing is really contributing to it. And it's sad because it doesn't have to be this way at all. And why it's so important for this kind of rhetoric to be encouraged and for it to continue to be bandied about by people like Chad and those of his ilk, it truly boggles the mind. It's either they have been drinking the Kool-Aid for so long that they really and truly believe the things that they're saying, or they're smart and they realize that a lot of this stuff shakes down to a population of people who can't make decisions in their day-to-day lives and are living in fear and are going to be constantly looking to the reliable authority figure in their life to tell them how they're supposed to be living their lives. And people like Chad position themselves in that like status as authority figure and know-it-all, and they dispense this apparently well-informed wisdom to their audiences, and it helps sell books and sell talks and sell courses and funnel more people into the money-making system, which when you break it down to brass tacks and you really look at how the whole thing operates, these people, where they're coming from, how the whole thing works, it feels like it's a money-making scheme. To me, is the perspective that I have of it. And maybe it's to keep a scared captive audience of people who will always be willing to shill out for whatever new thing it is that these crackpots cook up and publish as literature, Chad's language also normalizes economic dependence and verbal humiliation. He speaks derisively of women who work outside the home. Quote, "I've never met a woman who works full-time when she doesn't need to who's happy." What? I've never met a woman who works full-time when she doesn't need to who's happy. I think that's a misquote. I'm not really sure what that's supposed to say. But regardless, at another point, he goes further, suggesting that if men had properly asserted themselves earlier, they would have told women to shut your yap and go home and take care of the children. Nice. At around the 450 mark in the video, and this is not a theological argument about vocational discernment, it is crude, dismissive language that trains listeners to associate female speech with disorder and male preferences with authority. Now, I feel like this is a perfect opportunity for me to address what I have people bellyaching in the comment sections of my content over often, which is the fact that I speak very bluntly. And I am not opposed to the use of profanity to punctuate the points that I am trying to make. People get very upset about that. And look, I get it if you don't want to use profanity in your day-to-day life. That is your damn prerogative, and I support it. But I am going to, especially when I'm talking about people like this who clearly think so little of the world, think so little of their fellow man. Why would I waste my time and waste my precious brain power coming up with respectful ways to refer to these clowns when I can just call them fucking clowns and be on with my day? I give respect where respect is earned. And the people that I talk about, unfortunately, have not earned my respect, which is why I'm talking about them. I wouldn't be talking about them if they were respectful, upstanding people. So I understand the outrage and the pearl clutching. But you can keep it to yourself. I'm going to talk about these issues with the plain language that they deserve. I'm going to use the correct terminology. No unaliving over here. No murmur over here. And I'm going to do so bluntly. Very fucking bluntly. And if you don't like it, you don't have to listen. You can leave. Or you can leave a comment telling me about how much it pisses you off. Because either way, it's engagement, baby. So thank you. But why would I waste my time speaking nicely about people like this who think that it's okay to tell men to tell their wives to shut your yap and go home and take care of the children? Why? He doesn't deserve it. He hasn't earned it. He's an old, bald man with way too many opinions. And he scared a lot of people into following him. And I'm going to look forward to dismantling that brick by brick. Throughout these talks, women's resistance is consistently pathologized. Oh, I am sure Chad would say that I am just tore up from the floor up with the demon of Eve or whatever. The Jezebel spirit. I am sure. He'd probably tell me that I should be locked up because I'm crazy. Because I don't think that the things that he has to say are worthwhile or worth hearing or beneficial in any way. When women object to control, question authority, or assert boundaries, their response is rarely treated as morally intelligible disagreement. Instead, it is diagnosed as evidence of Eve's curse, feminist ideology, or spiritual disorder. Yes, how dare we stand up for ourselves and demand that we be treated as equals in this world? How dare we? Once resistance is framed in cosmic terms, disagreement becomes rebellion and assertiveness becomes sin. This is a classic feature of spiritually coercive systems. Harm is reinterpreted as holiness and obedience is sold as safety. This is something we've seen in Opus Dei, something we've seen in accounts from the Legionaries of Christ, something we've seen in accounts from the Sodality of Christian Life, something we've seen in accounts from Miles Jesu, accounts from Miles Christi. Shall I keep going? Accounts from the world of Ripperger et al. What is striking about all of this is how impersonal the rhetoric remains. Women are discussed almost exclusively as categories: wives, mothers, temptations, sources of control, rather than as concrete persons. These talks do not speak about women as companions or equals. This is not tradition. Catholic tradition does not teach women to accept humiliation as formation or coercion as virtue. It does not instruct wives to distrust their own judgments, bodies, or instincts in the name of holiness. And it does not define sanctity as the shrinking of one person so that another's authority can expand without resistance. The rhetoric documented here is not an unfortunate excess layered on top of otherwise sound teaching. It is the foundation of Ripperger's very public message to married people. Now, he is a priest in good standing with the Archdiocese of Denver who travels the country to train priests and speak to the faithful. Ostensibly, he's paid for his trouble. And that is why his words demand serious scrutiny. That question of accountability is where Part 3 will take up the discussion, directly to be continued. So, big thank you to Mike Lewis for doing this series. I have referenced his work in the past. I believe he's written about the Legion of Christ as well, and his website where Peter is, or where he publishes his work, I don't know if he owns it, but this site is great, and it's got some really good information on it, and if you've never checked it out, I highly recommend. And I will be keeping my eyes peeled for Part 3 when it comes out, and we will be continuing our analysis and commentary on Ripperger et al., which is going to continue to develop in the months ahead, so stay tuned.